Okay, pressure's on. Okay, hi everyone. So the presentation, as Mark said, it's basically going to be a summary of some of the things my colleague Sam mentioned at IOSC, with a bit of a kind of introduction to the wider world of talking about endpoints and what that really means in the world of plastic cleanup. But to kick us off, I'm just going to explain a little bit about ITOP, where we fit into this whole mismatch of stakeholders involved in pollution response, and how we try and help. So first of all, I'll introduce myself. My name's Amy Jewell. My background, I was schooled here. I spent 10 years in this lovely building, so I know all the good spots for taking naps at the back of this lecture theatre. So I've got my eyes on the people at the back. But yeah, so I studied oceanography. That was my background. And then I went on to do a PhD in geochemistry. And then I've gone on to work at ITOP. And then this is basically what I do. So I'm a technical advisor. The organization, we've been around about 55 years. We were established in the wake of the Torrey Canyon in 1968. That was a very large oil spill that happened off the southwest of the UK. And basically at that time, everyone realized that there wasn't much expertise in how to respond to a large oil pollution incident, nor was there any kind of legislation in place to provide compensation for those impacted. So ITOP was set up following that incident, basically to provide technical advice and technical expertise on ship source pollution events. And at the time, we were also involved in the administration of a kind of compensation fund. We're more separated from that today, but we still function on a non-profit basis, and we're funded by our membership, which is made up by about 90% of the global shipping industry. So basically, when a ship has an incident, a pollution incident, we tend to be notified by our members, so either the ship owners or the vessel insurers, and we are mobilized to site, or we assist remotely to provide technical advice on how best to respond to that spill and the impacts associated with it. And we're very fortunate because we kind of sit in this middle ground between the ship owners, and we run on a non-for-profit basis. Our advice can be provided to all stakeholders involved. So we work closely with governments, NGOs, responders, response organizations, lots of people in this room. So yeah, we're very fortunate that we're allowed to work with a lot of people. We're based in London. We also have an office in Singapore, but we do work globally. So I'll show you in a minute some of the experience we have in terms of these kind of large nodal incidents. Because normally I would go into kind of the timeline a bit more, but basically what's important is we start off as oil, but now we do everything. So there's chemicals, plastics, anything that comes off a ship, we're there. So we've actually provided advice on over 800 shipping incidents in over 100 countries around the world. So plastics, we all know the pellet problem. I don't need to go into this. You've heard it 10 times already today. Here's some of our experience. This is just a quick map of some of the ship source plastic pellet spills that we've been involved in over recent years. So the red ones show you spills that we've had kind of confirmation of. This isn't completely up to date, but it's kind of a handful. And the kind of ones with the purple ring are ones where we have attended. All of these were attended on site by us. Yeah, all of these were attended on site. The only exception is the trans carrier up in Scandinavia, because that was during COVID, so we assisted remotely with that one. But the rest we attended on site and were involved in the response, working alongside government agencies and responders on the shoreline. And some of our kind of other experience, some of the output we've done recently is the IMO guidelines on best practice on response to plastic pellet spills. We were involved in collating that. I myself wrote a large chunk of that document alongside contributions from Norway, France, Italy, I forget who else, CFAS was involved, CEDRA was involved. Lots of organizations came together to pull that together. So we were very fortunate to be involved in that, and that's coming soon, as we said earlier. And we're also writing a technical information paper on response to plastic pellets. We have a lot of resources available on the website, but the one for plastic pellets is coming later this year. So watch this space. Hopefully that will be of more operational use. Here's just some nice images of plastics. I'm not gonna stay too long in this because I know you want to keep this brief. Okay, so some of the kind of normal response challenges I think have been touched on. Marta did a really great job of summarizing all of this earlier. I'm just exactly echoing what Marta said. Basically, the mobility of these plastic pellets mean responding to them is really, really difficult because it's very dynamic and you're kind of, we always feel like you're a step behind a little bit. And recharge of plastic pellets is a problem even on very long timescales. We only really have rudimentary response tools, and to be honest, at the moment, those are the ones which we're finding to be most effective. But that does mean that cleanups ended up being really quite protracted because it takes so long. And then obviously there's this discussion around pre-existing plastic versus acute plastic that's related to an incident, perhaps a container loss. And that makes tracking recovery yields very difficult and just makes recovery of plastics in general more challenging. And it all kind of leads up to this discussion around endpoints and how you decide those. So for those who aren't as familiar with the terminology that we're using, an endpoint is that moment in a cleanup when you decide, okay, that's enough. And as Marta said, it really depends. In oil spills, for example, we know that oil does biodegrade. So it's okay to leave a little bit of oil remaining in the environment because you trust that the power of nature will break that down eventually. That's not the case for plastics. And that, unfortunately, is shown by the huge amount of background plastic contamination that we see on our shorelines, as has been demonstrated by everyone here today. Here is just some images from our time on site during a variety of spills of late, just kind of showing the amount of background plastic that you're tackling alongside these acute spills. So what do we think about when we want to decide the endpoint? When do you stop cleaning? You can't clean forever. It's not realistic. So in our experience, when we've been working alongside governments to determine when is an appropriate cleanup endpoint, there have been several major concerns. And these vary worldwide. I should point that out. Every incident is different. So there is a general agreement that complete recovery of plastic pellets following a shipping incident is not possible. That is not a practical solution. We cannot ever expect to recover everything. But the aim is always satisfactory pellet removal. Now, obviously, this is a very subjective term. Nobody really knows what that means operationally. So you have to work it out depending on the use of the shoreline. So is it an amenity beach? Is it a tourist beach? Is it somewhere that people don't tend to go? Or is it perhaps a triple SI? Is it a particularly environmentally sensitive resource? There's a lot of things to consider. And so it's the environmental impacts, but also the aesthetic disturbance. And then when you combine that with all of the challenges that we mentioned before to do with response and the kind of practicalities of removing pellets from various shorelines, that makes deciding the endpoint really quite challenging. So it all falls back to this NEBA approach, which is something Marta kindly introduced to me earlier. So this is your net environmental benefit analysis. The basic concept being that anything you're doing to remove pellets from the environment should be causing less damage than the pellets would cause if they remained where they were. And so you have to balance this. And there's a lot of considerations that go into this, and all the stakeholders involved will have a say in this process normally. What Sam was proposing in his IOSC proposal, on top of all those extra things which you might be considering, the use of the shoreline, the environmental sensitivities, the animals and plants in the area, all of this stuff, why don't we also consider NEBA through a sustainability lens? Why don't we also consider the impact of greenhouse gases associated with a response? And it's kind of taking a step back and looking at the global impact of mounting a response. So I'm just going to show you some ideas, start a conversation, see what you think. Okay. So this is the information, this is kind of the project that my colleague Sam so kindly outlined in his paper in IOSC. And so the whole idea here is to have a look at greenhouse gas emissions during a plastic pellet spill response to determine what that looks like, what magnitude is that, and should we be considering that in the decision of endpoints? And looking at that data, can we work out some alternate strategies to improve the NEBA process and really minimize that impact? So this is what he did. He looked at 3 case studies. We've got a case in South Africa, a case in Spain, and a case in Sri Lanka. All these cases, I think, have been mentioned already today. I'm sure you're familiar with them. And basically, we're very fortunate on ITOF is that we have oversight on a lot of information regarding the operations happening on site, the claims that get submitted afterwards, the waste recovery processes, and just kind of, it's very helpful that we have good contacts that have been kind enough to provide us with some of the information and data that we needed to carry out this study. And then, so on top of using 3 kind of, real case studies, if you like, Sam also looked at a couple of experimental options. And one of our kind of collaborators on this paper, they're a response organization in South Africa, and they were kind enough to do some test cleanup days for us. And basically what they did, they deployed a 10-person team, and we told them to go out and collect just microplastics for 3.5 hours, so a half-day period, for example. And then we asked them to go out for the afternoon of that day, and we asked them to go out and clean up all the plastics, not just the microplastics, but macroplastics as well. So basically, we looked at the greenhouse gas footprint of both of those exercises to see how that would compare and what that can tell us about whether we should be considering greenhouse gases in the endpoint considerations. This is just a little bit about how we do it. I won't go into this in more detail. I'm happy to kind of fill you in later if you have any questions. But basically at ITOF, we have a life cycle analysis greenhouse gas tool, which allows us, we have a database of greenhouse gas data associated with typical response activities, whether it be equipment, mobilization of people, and we have all this data already. So we were able to use this tool that we have already in-house to calculate the greenhouse gas footprint of the people and equipment that was used during these responses. So here we go. It's just some quick overviews here. So on the bottom, you have the name of the spill, and then on the vertical axis, you have the amount of CO2 produced per person per day, or the amount of CO2 produced per kilogram of plastic recovered, but we'll go into that. So if you look at these 3 real examples, we have Sri Lanka, South Africa, and Spain, and you can see that we're going to call it, you can see the level of plastic collected, so the kilograms of plastic pellets per day is the dark blue bars. The medium blue is the mean greenhouse gas per worker, so that's how much CO2 is being produced per person working on the shoreline. And then the red bar is what we're going to call our greenhouse gas efficiency. So that's how much greenhouse gas is being produced per amount of plastic recovered. So basically, we want that number to be low. We want our emissions to be as small as possible as we're collecting plastic. So you can see in all cases, that red bar is pretty big. The efficiency is pretty bad. We're producing a lot of greenhouse gas per plastic recovered. Then these are the data for the experimental versions. So this is when we sent those teams out and asked them to, in the first case, test 1 is when they were just picking up the big plastic. And then the second test is when they were picking up everything. And you can see this one in particular, you can see that they've obviously collected a lot more plastic by mass when they were picking up only macroplastic, because it was easier to do. And so that means that our efficiency, our greenhouse gas emissions per plastic recovered, is obviously going to be a lot lower, because that's how it works. So that's a nice outcome, I guess, an obvious outcome. And then if you look to test number 2, where they collected where they collected only microplastic, yeah, this is all plastic actually, sorry. You can see that the efficiency actually stays low because they were recovering a lot of plastic for similar emissions per person. So what does this tell us? Basically, it's a bit of a, Mark called it cheeky. I think it's just an interesting look into a wider lens into how to consider your response applications. It's just another tool in the toolbox. What it tells us is that plastic pellet cleanups can generate significant quantities of greenhouse gas emissions. Don't get me wrong, this is one tiny part of the consideration process. There are many other things that go into this decision-making process, and I'm not suggesting we don't mount a response because we're generating greenhouse gas emissions. That's not the point of this presentation. What I am trying to draw your attention to is that should we consider a broader approach? You know, there's 2 opposing paradigms here which could be used as a model for plastic pellet response. Model A, should we minimize greenhouse gas emissions by stopping cleaning after a nominal quantity of plastic has been recovered? So say we know we lost 50 tons of plastic from the vessel, should we collect 50 tons of plastic bottles, fishing nets, whatever it is, from the shoreline and then stop? Would that be a better environmental impact than chasing nurdles and producing loads of CO2 for years and years on end? Maybe. It depends where your priorities are. Or should we be going along model B, which is maximizing your plastic removal? So if you are going to do a protracted response where you chase all the nurdles for years on end, why don't you pick up loads of macroplastic at the same time? Because actually then you're out there anyway, your emissions are the same. You know, the net environmental benefit analysis could be a lot better. Now, I say this, I am fully aware that there are hundreds of other things that go into this conversation. Particularly relevant to my role is the liability is concerned and who's paying for this. You know, that's not how it works in the way of compensation. The polluter pays, but obviously they only want to pay for what they've spilled. So it's a little bit more complicated than this. And I imagine, to be honest, the right answer will be different in every country and will be different in every spill. And it might end up being somewhere in the middle of these two. But it's just an interesting kind of exercise to get us thinking outside the box a bit on how we structure these responses and what the goals are. And I think that's everything I wanted to say.
And I think the point I would say, and yes. I'm just being a bit of a pain in the arse, and I'm just trying to shake the stick at the tiger. Because the point is, often the endpoint isn't decided on net environmental benefit analysis. If you take this spill in Sri Lanka, I think the Marine Environmental Protection Agency there would be under pressure from the government. You clean up everything. You just keep cleaning, because that's what they want, is they want you to keep cleaning until all of the harm has been done. So that, and also that you have to remain there while any that reappears are recovered. Okay, I can understand that. But there has to be a justification, there has to be an endpoint. And in all these things, the difficulty is often agreeing what the endpoint should be.
Yes, and which is why we always encourage, and I know many other stakeholders in the game encourage decisions around endpoints happen quite early in the process. Yeah. You start that discussion as early as you can, so everyone's on a realistic goal, basically. Everyone's on the same page.
Right, okay. Can we do that?
Yeah.
We get you. Well, somehow get back to where we are, day 2. Oh, day 2.
Can I just respond?
Please.
Say how delighted I am to see that analysis you've done.
Oh, great.
It's really, really important in thinking about the totality. In fact, I was discussing this with Mark only a couple of weeks ago, that the greenhouse gas emissions really got to be taken into this. I also pointed out the North Pacific from the cleanup that's going on there. That, and I've said this on radio and on television, is nobody's thinking about greenhouse gas emissions. It's good, the efficiency is good on your scale, in that it's less than 1. Yeah. But still, for every 6,000 tons recovered of plastic from the North Pacific, it's about 1,000 tons of CO2.
Yeah.
That's just taking these warming rate ships kilometers offshore.
Okay. Okay.
Really good to see putting that in.
Thank you. No, we're doing a lot of work on it to do with oil spills and plastic spills. It's just another tool in the toolbox. We've always used it historically when talking about NEBA, but it's always been a hypothetical thing. You always say, well, it's not worth burning that much fuel in the tug or whatever, but we're just trying to put some numbers to it because it just helps. Everything you have in your toolbox, it helps.
Okay, thanks. So hang on, I want to get to the proposal. I actually support what Sam was saying. I think there needs to be realistic discussion on how an endpoint is agreed. Having thought about what he said, and actually I agree with what he says, there has to be an endpoint. But I think the endpoint should include 2 other things, and this is what I want to discuss, is I feel that you should be training local people in how to recover and to manage the site that you were managing. Now, to some degree, in most of the instances that the responders have been on, they end up using local employees anyway, and therefore local employees are being trained. But there needs to be a proficiency standard which is met, so you can leave them to take responsibility for their beach. And the second part is that you should also supply them with the equipment and the tools that they need to clean up and to continue to clean up their beaches, because as we've discussed today, the frequency of reappearance of these nurdles, particularly after a storm event, is common, and that is what you would expect to happen, and it may diminish over time. So my proposal is that we agree with what Sam has said, but we add those two elements in it. So that's the training of local staff to a proficiency standard and provision of equipment with them. Now, the other bit which needs to be added to that is the remote assistance, which can be provided from wherever over Teams or whatever. And where there is a necessity to continue to monitor independently monitor a quality standard, yes, there may be the need to fly someone out to conduct more proficiency training, but also to monitor and then update the analysis on the beach. So that is my proposal. Are we getting there on
So
that?
I would say very good proposal. I think in many cases, especially in specific ship source incidents, it's already happening. The framework is there. The chain of command is already in place so that does happen. When OSRL mobilized a site, you might employ some local contractors in some cases. It depends on the country, right? And it happens in many cases. So I think that is already happening, and the compensation available and long-term environmental monitoring support there are frameworks to provide that in ship source spills. I can't speak for the other types of spills we've spoken about here today. It sounds like the frameworks and the kind of chain of command is less clear in those kind of smaller local spills, but in ship source spills, I'd say it's already there.
Okay. Comments, Professor.
Under the law of unintended consequences, put into your equation what would happen if lightweighting plastic was replaced by heavier plastic. What does that do?
No, hang on. We're on. That's on a different thing. We're talking about pollution from vessels.
That we have the surrogate. We just had the comment. There is a surrogate lump constant type parameter that we think would capture the totality, but it may not capture the totality. It may actually have a net malicious outcome. You could create industries that are in the cleanup area, but are dependent on continued waste streams. And there are small Pacific islands who've actually aborted certain plastic to diesel schemes because it actually maintained a structural error in the resource use. I was just asking, are you in your overall modeling taking on these unintended consequences that are actually worse than the plastic pollution?
I'm not sure I fully follow. In the context of this study, do you mean the greenhouse gas study?
And I was the greenhouse gas, because I've sort of made probably more comment to you that greenhouse gas emission is a good summary. Probably I'm making a comment more about what you said, which I think it is, but there are unintended sort of pitfalls.
For sure, yeah. I mean, it's not the only metric we should use as a measure of successful cleanup. It's just, as I said, another tool in the toolbox. But if, for example, it was a spill, I guess we've been fortunate in the context that most of the large ship source plastics pellet spills that have happened so far have been light polypropylene that floated, and we kind of knew what to expect. There are many types of plastic which sink, which has been mentioned already. So we just haven't had to tackle that yet, and I'm sure it's coming.
Any other questions on it? Marcus. Hang on, Marcus. Hang on. Oh, actually, speak loudly. Speak loudly.
So, yeah, I've got Sam and David in Sri Lanka.
Yeah.
And I know the problems with the background pollution.
Mm-hmm.
And we were told that don't pick up all the background pollution, because then somebody has to pay for waste disposal, and then just, I can't pay for that, or so it was time and effort spent to get to the microplastics and avoid the background. And there was residuals coming in every day. So I'm a little bit, first I've seen the presentation, I think it's ballsy to try and use it as an endpoint. And so I guess the other bit that occurs to me is greenhouse gas is not going to start really significant until you get to the final polish, because all the time you've got gross pollution, you can't turn it back on it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So when you get 1 or 2% contamination on a 500 meter sand beach, you're gonna.
Yeah, and that's where this, I think, is more relevant. I agree. Sri Lanka was an extreme case. There was nurdles up here. You can't ignore that. It's you just have to clear it up. That's not where I'm suggesting this is of use. In Sri Lanka, I mean, as you well know, if you were there, cleanup's still ongoing. It's been years, and it will continue to be happening. The conversation is it worth it? And I know there were discussions with the club around should they be chasing, could they pick up macroplastic? And the answer was no in that case.
And as a respondent, it's frustrating.
Yeah.
I can do a great bit, but I'm told not to do it.
Exactly.
Somebody's got to pay ultimately, yeah.
Exactly.
But surely the plastic pollution, the pollution on the shoreline or the background pollution ends up being ocean pollution, ocean plastic anyway.
Yeah, but what we did pick up was segregated, so there's stuff
Yeah.
that we taken by the municipal side, and then
Yeah.
there's stuff that we taken by the contractors for the PI, so it makes work.
Yeah.
But the only other thing I was going to say, Mark, to your point, is that's the model, the ideal model, that's what we try to work to, train the locals, bring in, develop expertise, supervisors, and like a chain from our people. It doesn't always work in practice. In that case, Nigeria would be world leaders at response.
They would be indeed.
So,
Yeah, they would be.
You know, it's a good idea, but it needs government.
Yeah. You had a question up there.
No, I was just saying.
Speak up, please.
It's just the moral element. So if you are somewhere and it's people skill and there's.
I don't think the mic works, Janet. I don't think it.
Sorry.
Oh, it does work. It does work. Okay, good. Does work. All right. That's it. Hello.
It's the moral side of it. If you're there cleaning them still, and we're saying we're all in this planet together. That how, I don't know, goodwill to our fellow humans, picking up the background rubbish, whether it can, should be part of that. I can understand commercially, safety-wise, but, if you're there and you can help, I don't know, I feel like some of these BBC cameramen, if you're there and there's something that needs rescuing, isn't there that side of it that perhaps needs consideration,
I think that was the aim of this study, is to put some numbers to that moral feeling that I think everyone who was in Sri Lanka agrees with. Because you're right, it is a pain when you have to leave it on the shoreline when you're there picking up nurdles. So that was kind of the aim of this, if it is driven by who's paying, which in many cases it is, you need to speak the same language and you need to provide them with data that will motivate them to change their strategy. And that's what we're trying to do.
Robert.
In the UK, Ireland, are you moving towards the CSR, the corporate social responsibility funding, these sort of programs?
Oh, no. There isn't any corporate social responsibility funding of these sort of projects. No, there's no such thing. And even though there is the start of a deposit return scheme in this country, where does the money go? The money won't be coming back into the industry. The money will be sitting back in central government. But actually, will it flow out of central government?
There is new initiative starting, which is basically called CSR, corporate social.
Yeah, well, we know what corporate social responsibility is, but that requires companies, the polluters primarily, to actually invest that money in things like cleanup. But they have no incentive. There's no requirement for them to do it. Therefore, they're not going to do it. And that's a really sad place that we're in. So we are relying upon NGOs like FIDRA, like Planet Aware, and other NGOs to actually lobby loudly, as loud as they can, to gain funds so that they can do the good work that they do. But that's how it is.
Well, I look forward to sharing with you the learnings that we're taking out of India, because India.
They are relevant to that country.
Correct.
But in this country, it's the intransigence of the government who actually have real problems to deal with. And in fairness, they see this as a low priority, in fairness to them, which is sad, but that's actually true. There isn't enough money floating around the economy to do everything that the government nor the public want to do. And that's the sad reality of it, which is why we end up relying on NGOs. Yeah. Heather.
I guess one of my questions that keeps whirring around, and I don't know whether it leads into this, is I agree there's a wide acceptance that you can't clean up all the colours. So the proportion that can't be cleaned up, how is it then decided, how is then a compensation package decided for that? And whether that also plays into this, or well, is that then some of that student matter about it? The other thing I feel I'm obligated to say is that the macroplastic is easier to pick up. That often means that there are people picking it up, there are schemes for picking it up, there are there are entire industries dedicated to picking it up, and that is someone's livelihood. And taking that away because it's easier than doing what your livelihood is, which is picking up the little things. There's a moral element to that, and having sat in conversations where the litter pickers are really worried about some of the schemes and proposals because that's their livelihood. It's very complicated, and you know, I kind of wish it wasn't their livelihood and they had a different, better job. But in the absence of that, that's the reality in some big places that we're talking about.
So I can. So in terms of the compensation is always, well, most of the time is done under the guise of the international conventions. So you follow the guidance, and that's what's typically liable for compensation. When it comes, people follow the same guidelines. They don't have to, but they tend to follow the same guidelines just for consistency. In terms of people, for example, whose livelihood would be litter picking, macroplastic litter picking, I mean, I could see opportunities where if there's awareness of that, they could be part of the workforce, which could be locally hired to pick up the microplastics. I think there are ways to find solutions for those problems. It's awareness, and like you said, you need to talk to each other to be even aware that that is a group who have that livelihood.
Justina, did you want to make a point?
It's incredibly interesting, the holistic approach, whatever tools we have in our toolbox, endpoints. I'm just wondering if we're not just going to be hindered by human nature and the fact that what we perceive as an immediate or an abstract threat. Like, do we need to take a step back and then have any suggestions for this? But you know, cognitive bias. Some of us will see macroplastics as their immediate threats, others don't. In the time of the response, it's not really the time to be talking about it, right? Like, do we need to preempt this? Well, I'm sure you've had these conversations already by trying to bring everyone together, the decision makers, the regulators, the EAs, and rounding on what is acceptable to do and why. Bear in mind that's what we asking different culture. So it's really that common that this is great, I'm all for it, and especially if we can get close involved with the NGOs and the communities, but there is human psychology massively at play here, which just to be aware of that also.
Good.
Somebody loves presenting. Best presentation here.
Oh.
Spark debate.
Excellent. That's what I try to do.
Spark collaboration. This is what this event is all about. There's been more talk about this presentation than any other one over the last 2 days.
Well, pleased to hear it. Thank you.
This is how we solve it.
Yeah, and actually, the one part I will make, Robert, I said deposit return scheme when I meant to say extended producer responsibility. So within this country now, coming in, there is a thing called extended producer responsibility. So if you produce a plastic, or if you produce a product, you're responsible for its life cycle. So that has come in as a, but it doesn't actually start to produce funding until April 2025. So in a period of where reporting occurs of the volumes that you produce. Now, what happens to that money is it's just going to go straight back into the Treasury. The Treasury is then going to use it for the public purse. And the other thing which is very disappointing is that deposit return schemes, which would be perfect for which encourages people who, if they buy a glass bottle or a plastic bottle, take it and put it into a machine, and they put 100 bottles in, and they get whatever they get £1 back, or they get some currency back, which would actually do the benefit of that would be people would be going round, you know, and they would be collecting plastic to put it in. When I was a kid, I used to go around the edge of a golf course, and I'd pick up all the balls which had gone outside the golf course, and I'd run round to the corner, and I'd flog them to the golfers who were about to go and lose golf balls, and I'd go around again later in the day, pick it up in my school holiday. But the deposit return scheme, which is ready to go, but no government has the gumption and the determination to push it through, because it would clear the streets of macroplastic bottles and things like that. which is a real shame because these tools are there. And they work. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've been in Germany, you know, at the end of your 2 weeks there, I mean, the people are coming around saying, can we take all your bottles and your plastic away? So that they can go and get a few quid, and it works. It's just brilliant.
The only issue with that, Mark, being that plastic can't be recycled that many times.
But the issue is what do you do with it?
Yeah, so what you end up, I mean, I think DRS does have a place.
Yeah.
Show British trust.
Yeah.
But I think arguably you might say, or I'm going to argue probably now, that you are actually telling the people, the public, that recycling is a real, because we don't recycle, you can't recycle plastics very often. And I think recycling has a place, it's a tiny, tiny little place, and it is DRS, but it should be looked to be ended as soon as possible. And I think the idea that DRS, I think it would cover, I actually think it kind of opens up a bit of Pandora's box. People say it's fine, because I could my DRS machine, I got my 20p ticket back.
Yeah.
Bottom. And I think we should be careful as a group.
Yeah.
DRS is no fancy as this. I actually think it's potentially a problem personally.
Yeah, but then it takes into the argument of recycling and creating value out of the plastic which is recovered. Sorry, Richard.
No, I was actually just going to agree with this. We
Yeah.
need to be mindful that you can't go on recycling.
No.
Whether you that
Very quickly,
energy from, sorry,
very quickly get to plastic
Yeah.
recycling.
I want to do a half a dozen times you can do it. Something.
Yeah.
But it certainly is, then the only advantage of course with the DRS is that one can then move into getting energy from waste in a
Yeah.
more efficient.
Yeah.
It's done better. So that's.
Get more energy from it if it was oil coming out of the ground.
Yeah, well, but actually, the irony is we can't get approval for pyrolysis machines, which would actually, you know, okay, you chuck them in, they burn, they produce oil. You know, they do work, but you then got to worry about the emissions that they then produce, which is, yeah, it's all a question of balancing. So we have engaged you and we've made you think about it.
Perfect.
Shit, we did
That was
something
the
good then.
aim.
We did good. We did good.
Great.
Thanks very much, Amy.